Marcus Bell, 34 years old, manager of the Savannah Smokehouse restaurant in Savannah, Georgia, is sitting in the defendant's chair. A black man with a clean record, a devoted father, and a volunteer at a local nonprofit organization. He now faces serious charges: corporate fraud and the embezzlement of $18,500 from the company where he worked for 2 years. The accuser is Paul Westlake, the restaurant's owner, a white former military man known for his strictness. He claims that Marcus took advantage of his trust and manipulated the system for personal gain. The prosecution argues that there is solid evidence: duplicated receipts, logins registered under Marcus's name, and suspicious messages. Meanwhile, the defense claims racial persecution, system failures, and the omission of a white employee who also had access to the records. Now the trial begins, and you, the viewer, are the jury. In the end, you will decide: is Marcus Bell guilty, or is he being used as a scapegoat? Silence fills the courtroom as Judge Clarence Monroe, with a stern expression and firm voice, takes his place at the front. He surveys those present, their faces tense and attentive, before announcing, "This court is now in session to hear the case of the state of Georgia versus Marcus Bell. The defendant is charged with corporate fraud and grand larceny. The jury present here must listen to the evidence and, in the end, decide whether the defendant is guilty or innocent." Marcus, dressed in a dark suit, keeps his eyes down for a moment, then looks directly at the jury. His face shows tension, but also determination. Prosecutor Harvey McCallum rises. Tall, with a sharp tone, he walks slowly to the center of the room and declares, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today's case is simple. The defendant, Marcus Bell, embezzled money from the company where he was a manager. He took advantage of exclusive system access, forged receipts, and pocketed nearly $20,000. We will present clear and compelling evidence. His greed betrayed the trust placed in him." On the other side, Regina Lopes rises confidently. Young, with sharp eyes and a steady voice, she responds, "Don't be fooled by the appearance of simplicity. What we'll see here is a flawed investigation, full of gaps and bias. Marcus Bell is a black man accused based on weak evidence in a system that always doubts people like him. We will prove that this trial is biased and that the truth is more complex than it seems." The judge then announces, "The prosecution may begin presenting its evidence and witnesses." The trial is now officially underway, and Marcus Bell's fate lies in the hands of the jury. Prosecutor Harvey McCallum walked to the center of the courtroom with measured steps, his eyes fixed on the jury. His presence commanded respect, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who fully believed in the case he was presenting. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, raising a small stack of papers, "today you will see that Marcus Bell is not a victim of anything but his own ambition. Let's look at the facts." He turned to the bench and held up the first document. "These are copies of receipts registered in the Savannah Smokehouse system between January and April of this year. 57 duplicated receipts, and all these entries were made using the defendant's login. 15 of them, members of the jury, were entered after business hours, meaning from home or without any supervision, and all involved cash refunds." The judge nodded, allowing the documents to be handed to the jury. To better understand how this was possible, we'll hear from the head accountant of the external audit firm hired by Mr. Paul Westlake. We call to the stand Mr. Benjamin Larkin. Benjamin, a gray-haired man with a measured tone, took his place in the center of the courtroom. "Mr. Larkin," the prosecutor began, "what did your audit find in the records?" "We found a pattern of reimbursements that completely deviated from the previous month's averages," Benjamin explained. "Many of them lacked clear justification. When we cross-checked the system data, we saw that the records were always linked to Marcus Bell's login. And what was the total amount identified as suspicious? $18,500. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. "Thank you. One more question. Would it have been possible for someone else to make those entries using Mr. Bell's login?" Benjamin hesitated for a second. "Technically, yes, if someone knew his password, but we found no evidence that this happened." Harvey thanked him and dismissed the witness, then turned to the next piece of evidence. "Now, I ask the jury to listen to this audio," he said, pressing a button on a recorder. Marcus Bell's voice filled the room. "I'm handling my debts my own way. Cash is king." The phrase sounded like a confession. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus remained still, his gaze momentarily lost. This recording was taken from a voice message exchange between the defendant and a friend. It clearly shows his state of mind: debts, desperation, and an attitude of doing whatever it takes. Nothing more dangerous when one has access to a company's money, the prosecutor said gravely. Regina Lopes shifted in her chair, but the judge had not yet given her the floor. But that's not all, ladies and gentlemen. During the investigation, a notebook was found in the defendant's locker. This notebook contained handwritten weekly entries, and, surprise, the values matched the amounts recorded in the digital system. He held the notebook up to the jury. "Here, for example," he pointed out, "in the week of February 5th, there's a recorded amount of $2,300. Cross-referencing with the duplicated receipts from that week, the total is $2,320. Coincidence?" The prosecutor shut the notebook with force, creating a small echo in the room. "Now, let's hear from someone who knew the restaurant's daily routine well. We call to the stand employee Alice Monroe, cashier." Alice, a young woman in her early 20s with her hair tied back and still wearing the restaurant's logo on her uniform, approached the stand nervously. "Miss Monroe," the prosecutor said in a gentler tone, "how was the cash register managed during Mr. Bell's shifts?" He did almost everything himself. At the end of the shift, he'd ask us to leave the records with him. He said he preferred to review everything personally. "Did this happen only with him?" "Yes. Cody, the other manager, usually had us close things out in pairs." "Did you ever see Marcus manipulating the system?" Alice hesitated. "Not directly, but sometimes. After we left, he'd still be at the computer for a while. I thought it was normal work." The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Miss Monroe." He turned once again to the jury, his expression confident. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, everything points to a pattern: exclusive access, suspicious behavior, incriminating messages, and records that match the amounts in question. And more. Marcus Bell had personal debts. Debts he didn't present as a justification, but that emerged between the lines of his own words." He paused briefly for dramatic effect before concluding. "Mr. Westlake trusted the defendant, gave him a position of responsibility, and was betrayed. It is the duty of justice to right this wrong. By the end of this trial, you will see that there is no room for reasonable doubt. Marcus Bell is guilty." With that, Harvey McCallum returned to his seat, leaving the room heavy with tension. The jurors exchanged focused glances. The judge looked toward the defense, took a deep breath, and announced, "The defense may now present its witnesses and evidence." But at that moment, it was clear that the weight of the prosecution had left its mark. Marcus remained seated, hands clasped on his lap, trying to contain his anxiety. Beside him, Regina Lopes leaned in and whispered something in his ear. She knew it was now her turn to dismantle, piece by piece, the narrative built by the prosecution, and the game was just beginning. The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the sound of Regina Lopes's heels crossing the wooden floor. The young defense attorney positioned herself in the center, in front of the jury, and took a deep breath before beginning. Her tone was firm, yet measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, scanning the attentive faces, "today you heard the prosecution's version, a carefully crafted narrative, but an incomplete one, built on assumptions and riddled with dangerous omissions. Now it's time to hear the full truth." She turned briefly toward Marcus, who nodded, eyes brimming with emotion. "We call to the stand IT expert Mr. Alejandro Vieira." Alejandro, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses and a tablet in hand, took his place discreetly. Regina got straight to the point. "Mr. Vieira, you analyzed the internal system records of the restaurant. What did you find?" "Certainly. During the forensic analysis, I identified that the logins associated with the user M. Bell, that is, Marcus Bell, were used on 2 different computers at the same time, on at least 3 occasions." Regina stepped a bit closer. "And is that technically possible?" "No, unless the password was shared, or someone gained unauthorized access to his login. So this could indicate that someone else used Marcus's login? Yes, without a doubt. The restaurant system doesn't have two-factor authentication. Anyone with the password could access it. Was the system secure? Not at all. The software was outdated, lacked detailed activity logs, and had poorly configured access permissions. Regina nodded and thanked him, then turned back to the jury. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, anyone with Marcus's password, and there is evidence that passwords were frequently shared among managers, could have made the suspicious entries. She then raised her hand and announced, "We call to the stand witness Tanya Lewis." There was visible movement in the courtroom. Tanya was a former cashier at the restaurant, and her presence had not been announced before the trial. As she took the stand, the murmurs ceased. Regina approached solemnly. "Mrs. Lewis, you asked to testify voluntarily. What do you have to tell us?" Tanya looked at the judge, then at the jury, and took a deep breath. "I saw it. I saw Cody Raines working on the system using Marcus's login. This was in March. It was late at night, after hours." The prosecutor immediately stood. "Objection. Unqualified witness. No material evidence." The judge raised a hand. "Objection noted, but the witness will be heard." Regina turned again to Tanya. "Did you tell anyone about this at the time?" "I tried. I spoke to the regional supervisor, but I was ignored. Then Cody called me to talk. Said it was all normal procedure and that I should forget what I saw, that no one would believe a temp worker anyway. I got scared and kept quiet." A heavy silence settled over the room. Cody, seated among the observers, averted his eyes and rubbed the back of his neck, visibly uncomfortable. Regina seized the moment. "Now we call Miss Janelle Brooks." A young woman with curly hair and a determined gaze took Tanya's place. She was a current employee of Savannah Smokehouse. "Miss Brooks, what can you tell us about system access?" "Everyone knew the managers shared passwords. It was common practice. And also, the security cameras constantly failed. We even joked that they were just decorations." "Did that happen on the days of the suspicious entries?" "Yes. There was even a day Marcus complained to Paul about the vault camera, and he told him to find a way and move on." Regina then picked up a document from the table. "This is a copy of emails sent by Marcus to the owner, Paul Westlake, reporting system failures and requesting technical support. Most of these requests were ignored." She turned once more to the jury. "They accuse him of operating in the shadows. But when he tried to bring things into the light, no one listened. Now it was Marcus Bell's turn. With hesitant steps, he approached the stand. The judge reminded him he was under oath. Regina approached him respectfully. "Marcus, what do you have to say to the jury that will decide your fate?" He looked at the faces before him, his voice trembling at first. "I dedicated myself to that restaurant like it was mine. I got there early, left late. I never took a cent that wasn't mine. When I noticed something was wrong, I tried to report it, but I was ignored. And when the numbers didn't add up, they threw it all on me." He took a deep breath and continued. "If I were a white manager, they would have given me the benefit of the doubt. But with me, they went straight to the police. No internal investigation, no chance to defend myself. I was treated as guilty before anyone even listened to me." Silence returned. Some jurors looked visibly moved. Marcus lowered his eyes, voice breaking. "I have a daughter. She's 7. I try to teach her that the world is fair, but I don't know if I believe that anymore." Regina thanked him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. Then she turned to the jury one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be swayed by convenience. The prosecution's evidence is weak, circumstantial, and based on a system corrupted from within. Today, you have the chance to stop another injustice. Do not judge based on skin color, fear, or assumptions. Judge based on facts." She then stepped back with dignity. The judge glanced at the clock, took a reflective pause, and said, "We will now proceed to final arguments." The trial was entering its decisive stage, and the question lingered in the air: truth or setup, guilty or scapegoat? The clock marked late afternoon when Judge Clarence Monroe leaned slightly back in his chair and gestured with his hand. We will now begin closing arguments. The prosecution has the floor. Prosecutor Harvey McCallum stood slowly. He walked to the center of the room and remained silent for a few seconds, studying each juror as if trying to read their thoughts. Then he began. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've heard many words today. Emotional stories raised suspicions and even an attempt to flip the facts in favor of the defendant. But I ask that you now return to the core of what is being judged here. The evidence, concrete proof, documents, records. He held up the copies of the duplicated receipts once more, the same already presented. 57 duplicated invoices, refunds made after business hours, access under Marcus Bell's login. The evidence is before you. All of this doesn't vanish just because a former employee showed up last minute with unsubstantiated claims. Harvey took a few steps, nearing the defendant's bench. Mr. Bell says he's a victim of prejudice, that he was judged based on his race. That's a serious accusation and one that deserves consideration. But today, what's on trial is not racism. It's a case of fraud and embezzlement. Marcus Bell had exclusive access. He had motive. He had opportunity. And now he hides behind theories. Regina Lopes raised an eyebrow slightly but remained silent. And as for the alleged system failures, the prosecutor continued. Even the defense expert said it was technically possible for someone else to gain access, but at no point was it proven that this happened. That's speculation, but the facts scream guilty. Harvey then referred to the audio presented the previous day. Marcus's voice saying, "I'm handling my debts my own way. Cash is king." He repeated the line with emphasis, almost like a chant of accusation. He says it was sarcasm, a joke. But what if it wasn't? What if it reflects exactly what he did? He then walked over to the bench and picked up the seized notebook. And what about these notes? Handwritten, found in his locker. The values match the fraudulent entries. This is no coincidence. This is shadow bookkeeping. This is premeditation. Harvey paused, dropped his shoulders, and softened his tone. I get it. It's hard to believe that someone trustworthy, someone who seemed honest, could do this. That's why we have evidence. Because instinct doesn't always tell the truth. And the facts, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are clear as daylight. Marcus Bell is guilty. He returned to his seat. The room remained silent. The judge then gestured to the defense. Regina Lopes stood. Her steps were quicker, her posture firmer. She stopped in the same spot where Harvey had stood and, after a brief breath, began to speak. Facts. That's been the prosecution's favorite word. But let me remind you what we actually saw here. Selective interpretations of fragments, a broken system, a rushed investigation, and a narrative crafted to fit a pre-chosen culprit. She walked before the jury. Was the login under Marcus's name? Yes. But the system allowed multiple access under the same account. Passwords were openly shared. There was no digital security. Anyone with access to the office could do whatever they wanted, and the prosecutor knows it. She pointed with poise toward the prosecution's table. The defense brought in a forensic expert. The prosecution did not. We presented system logs showing access from different computers at the same time. That's not a possibility. That is technical proof that Marcus wasn't alone in that system. She paused. But perhaps the strongest evidence is silence. The silence of Mr. Westlake, who ignored Marcus's emails asking for tech support. The silence about Cody Raines, who was never investigated. Conveniently left out. The same Cody who, according to a spontaneous witness, was seen using Marcus's login. That is not coincidence. That is omission. Regina then walked to Marcus's bench, rested her hand on its edge, and turned to the jury. Marcus is not perfect. He has debts, yes. He's a black man trying to survive in a system that often doesn't give him space. But none of that makes him guilty. The prosecution offers a line of audio, stripped from context, and calls it a confession. You heard Marcus say, "I'm handling my debts my own way." But do you remember the laugh? The tone? It was clearly a joke. A sarcastic release. But that doesn't help a prosecutor who needs a villain. She lifted the notebook. This notebook? It's full of numbers, yes. But there are no dates. No direct links. Marcus explained it was for personal budgeting, managing debt. They interpreted it as criminal accounting. There is not a single piece of evidence that this money left the restaurant and ended up with him. All they have are assumptions. Regina raised her voice. And here is the central point, ladies and gentlemen. Doubt. Reasonable doubt. What protects every citizen from being wrongly convicted? If there is a witness saying someone else issued the refunds, if the system allowed multiple logins, if the cameras were conveniently down on the days of the fraud, how can we say beyond a reasonable doubt that Marcus Bell is guilty? She approached the jury without crossing the marked line. This case is a mirror of American reality, a black man in a leadership role, a financial discrepancy, and without an internal investigation, he is automatically the guilty one. No one stopped to ask, what if it was someone else? No, it was easier to fire, accuse, and arrest. She looked directly into the eyes of an older juror, then continued with a trembling voice. Did Mr. Westlake trust Marcus? Yes, but not enough to hear his side before going to the police. Why? Because the system gives no time or space for doubt when the accused looks like Marcus Bell. Regina stepped back, taking a deep breath. You do not need to prove Marcus is innocent. That's not what the law requires. It's the prosecution who must prove guilt, beyond a reasonable doubt, and they have not. She stopped beside Marcus, who watched her with quiet gratitude. I trust that you won't let a man be condemned based on flaws, assumptions, and prejudice. I trust that you'll look beyond the surface, and you'll see the truth. She returned to her seat. The judge gave a slight nod and said, the prosecution may now offer its final rebuttal. Harvey McCallum rose again, this time with no papers in hand. His voice was more restrained, almost calm. The defense is brilliant, I won't deny it, and it touched on real wounds in our society. But this courtroom is not judging historical injustices. It is judging a specific crime. He looked directly at the jury. Marcus Bell had access. Marcus Bell had debt. Marcus Bell logged the refunds. System flaws don't erase that. Ignored emails don't erase records. A single witness, with no proof, doesn't overturn official documentation. He took a breath and concluded, do justice, but do justice based on evidence, not on speeches. The judge then struck his gavel. Closing arguments are concluded. The jury will now be instructed and will begin deliberations. The air in the courtroom felt suspended. All eyes turned to the jury. The truth, if there was just one, now rested in their hands. The tension in the courtroom was almost tangible. Judge Clarence Monroe adjusted his glasses and leaned slightly forward. His voice cut through the silence with solemnity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after intense testimony, presentation of evidence, debates, and questioning, we have reached the decisive moment of this trial. He paused, looking directly at Marcus Bell, who remained still, eyes fixed on an undefined point on the floor. The defendant, Marcus Bell, stands accused of corporate fraud and grand larceny against the Savannah Smokehouse restaurant, where he served as manager. The prosecution argues that he used his position of trust to deliberately embezzle $18,500 through a scheme involving false refunds and manipulation of the internal system. The evidence presented includes login records, a notebook containing suspicious figures, and messages suggesting questionable intent. The judge then turned to the other side of the courtroom. The defense, in turn, highlights technical flaws in the system, the absence of surveillance cameras during critical moments, and omissions in the investigation. It claims the defendant is being unjustly accused due to racial bias and a partial inquiry. A witness stated having seen another employee, Cody Raines, using the defendant's login during unauthorized hours. Forensic analysis confirmed simultaneous access using the same account from different locations. The judge leaned back briefly, then straightened again, his tone turning even graver. If convicted, Marcus Bell may face a prison sentence of 6 to 12 years, in addition to a fine proportional to the amount embezzled. This is therefore a trial that will determine not only the fate of one man, but also the way justice is applied when facts become entangled with prejudice, failures, and silence. Now it is up to you, the jurors, to decide. Based on all that has been presented, considering the evidence, the testimonies, and the doubts raised, is Marcus Bell guilty or innocent? The decision is in your hands. So, what is your verdict? Write it in the comments.